The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not mold, not rot, nothing that came with a label you could stick on it and move on. It was dry and sour, with that hot paper, overheated plastic edge you get when an office copier burns through a roller. It came out of the crate before I even got the lid fully open, and I remember having this brief, completely sensible thought that whatever had been sealed in there that long had probably earned the right to stay sealed. I opened it anyway. That sounds worse now than it did then. At the time, it felt like the kind of dumb, routine choice you make on night shift when you work for a department nobody remembers exists until they need something impossible found. I worked in Municipal Property Archive, Sub-Level B, under the Transit Administration Building. We handled everything that had slipped free of ownership, but not of paperwork. Overflow from lost and found, unclaimed property from evictions, stuff tagged by transit police and never reclaimed, old evidence transfers once the legal hold expired. If an object had outlasted the person willing to explain why it mattered, it usually ended up with us. Most nights were dust, forms, and bad coffee. There was a rhythm to the place. Badge in, sign the temp and humidity sheet clipped beside the dehumidifier. Check the sump alarm. Wake up the intake terminal and wait for the screen to stop blooming green in the corners. Run water through the coffee machine twice if you wanted any chance of the first cup not tasting like pennies. Then start on whatever the day shift had decided could wait until after midnight. The annex had its own climate, cold pockets between the compact shelves, damp heat near the loading alcove, paper dust in the air all the time, fine enough to feel on your tongue by 3 a.m. Some noises became part of the scenery, the shelves settling on their tracks, pipes ticking overhead, the chain in the freight shaft quivering somewhere above you. Other noises never got normal, no matter how long you worked there. A long metal click in an empty aisle that sounded too much like somebody shifting their weight. A bump from behind a row you knew you'd already closed out. The place trained you to ignore almost everything, which in hindsight may have been the worst thing about it. I'd been there just under 4 years when the crate showed up. It came down on the freight elevator with the rest of a Tuesday delivery, just after 11. One a pallet, half full. 3 sealed bags from code enforcement, a stack of tagged suitcases, a banker's box full of old claim envelopes, and the crate. No courier. That wasn't rare. They were supposed to wait for a signature, but if somebody upstairs was behind, they'd dump the load in the car and send it down. Annoying, not unusual. I checked the manifest. The first 7 items were there. The crate wasn't. Nobody used that kind anymore. Plywood shell, steel corners, recessed handles, the old transit stencil sanded and painted over so many times it looked blistered. Plastic tubs and RFID carts had replaced them years before I got hired. This thing looked like it had been dragged through 3 different storage basements and forgotten in all of them. No barcode, no transfer slip, just a number on the lid in white grease pencil. B-19-44. It didn't match any current tracking format. I figured somebody upstairs had shoved an old training prop onto the wrong pallet. I cleared the rest of the load, logged what I could, rolled everything into intake, and left the crate beside the terminal. I should have left it there. But there's a point in the night, usually sometime after 2, where being alone underground makes curiosity feel almost responsible, like if you don't check the thing, you're the one creating tomorrow's problem. So I sat down at the terminal and searched the number. There was a result. Old file, retention closure, 1994. Status, destroyed. That got my attention. Our system was ugly, but it didn't usually lie. Destroyed meant witnessed, signed, archived, done, I opened the record tree. Thin file. Original intake department redacted. Chain of custody incomplete. Compliance note added in 1996. Destruction certificate dated 2001. Signed by 2 supervisors I didn't know. Then there was a note I'd never seen before. Do not recreate inventory record. That bothered me more than destroyed. Destroyed was procedure. It belonged to policy. Do not recreate inventory record sounded like somebody trying to prevent a mistake they understood better than I did. I checked the crate again. The security tape across the edge had gone brittle and crackled under my thumb. Somebody had screwed the lid down at some point, but 2 screws were missing and the others had lifted enough to show the threads. One corner still carried the stamp of an old municipal warehouse that had been closed before I started with the city. I called security upstairs, partly because I didn't like the file, and partly because I wanted it on record that I'd tried. No answer. I called my supervisor's office line, let it ring twice, and hung up. Denise hated being called at night, unless water was actively coming through a ceiling, or a reporter was involved. So I told myself I was just going to verify contents and document the discrepancy. That was the lie, basically. The kind you tell in a perfectly calm voice because you want your nerves to line up behind it. I hauled the crate onto the steel sort table under the hanging fluorescent strip. The light there always buzzed a little. I remember that because it seemed louder once I started prying at the latch. When the lid came loose, it didn't creak or slam. Just a sticky little peel, rubber gasket separating from wood. Then the smell hit properly. Inside was packing paper, folded neatly, stiff at the edges. Under that were items wrapped in a brown evidence cloth and tied with string tags. Each tag had typewriter text and a stamped date. No names, no departments, just numbers and clipped descriptions. House key, transit token, photograph fragment, appointment card, audio cassette, receipt. 12 items in all, arranged with care, not dumped in, not jumbled. It looked like somebody had laid them out for review, and then, in the middle of the process, changed their mind and caught the lid. The first wrong thing about it was how uneven the time made no sense. The tags were dated from 1989 to 1994. The objects were not. One receipt was on thermal paper and still readable. A pharmacy leaflet used a warning label format that came much later. A plastic key fob had the updated housing logo we didn't start seeing until years after the dates on the tags. Not brand new, just wrong in a way that scraped at the back of my brain. Archive work is mostly noticing small lies, staple types, adhesive aging, form revisions, fonts, barcodes. You spend enough years around stored paper and abandoned objects, and you stop seeing old or new. You see things fitting together or not fitting together. A folder from 1991 with a clip manufactured in 2008 feels wrong, the way a face feels wrong when one eye is slightly off. So when I say the crate made me cold, it wasn't because I thought I'd found something supernatural. It was because nothing in it belonged with anything else, and still it all seemed to be part of the same file. I laid the contents out, a bus transfer for a route that had been eliminated, a child's glove, left hand only, gray wool, the fingertips darkened like they'd been pressed into soot. A disposable camera, fully wound, a maintenance work order for plumbing access, apartment number blacked out by hand, a cassette tape in a clear case with a strip of masking tape across it. On the tape, in blue ink, someone had written 1114, and a key ring with 3 keys and a brass municipal tag stamped with 6 digits. I picked up the keys first because they looked ordinary. Ordinary things are usually safer. Then I saw the tag. Building services used that numbering system for residential access sets. Old format, but not ancient. District, building block, unit group. I turned it over. There was a crescent-shaped nick beside the hole where the tag met the ring. I knew that mark. I'd made it myself, trying to pry ice out of my keys with a utility blade on the loading dock one winter. I told myself I was mistaken. City keys all looked alike. People scratched metal. I was tired. The air in the annex was bad. The fluorescent hum was getting to me. I took my own key ring out of my pocket and set it beside the one from the crate. They weren't identical. Mine had a grocery card on it and an extra locker key from work. The deadbolt key was newer. The blue rubber cap on the building key had split farther. But the ring on the table was the older version of my set. Same ring, same scratch, same brass tag. The set I'd carried before the locks in my building were changed after a break-in on the 4th floor. I put it down so fast it slapped the steel. There's a specific moment where your body stops waiting for your mind to catch up. My hands went damp. My throat closed up. I checked my pocket again, though I didn't need to. My current keys were still there, warm from my leg. I kept staring at the older set like it might do something if I stopped. If I had any sense, I would have shut the crate and gone upstairs. Instead, I kept working. Under the last layer of paper, there was a flat envelope sealed with red fiber tape. A clip held a note to the front. Review only upon reconciliation of witness discrepancy. No signature, no letterhead, nothing that told me who had written it or why that wording made the hair on my arms lift. Inside were surveillance stills. Matte, black and white prints, time-stamped along the bottom. Apartment hallway, mid-rise residential, bad camera angle from near a stairwell. I recognized mine on the second photo, not because there was anything remarkable about it, because I'd spent years trudging down that same hall with grocery bags, laundry, wet shoes, keys in my teeth, half awake after shift. Same cheap carpet squares, same bent corner on the fire notice, same scuff in the baseboard outside my door. The timestamp was from 5 years before I moved into the building. In the next frame, my apartment door was open. No person visible. Just a dark shape crossing the threshold low to the ground, as if something had been said just inside. I moved to the third photo. A box sat outside the apartment. Plain cardboard moving box, thick tape around the middle. On the side, in black marker, kitchen. My stomach dropped before I'd even sorted out why. It was my handwriting. I know how weak that sounds written out. Everybody writes kitchen on boxes, but handwriting is physical. It has balance, habits, little private mistakes. The K tipped right. The end of the N dragged low. It was mine the same way your own voice on a recording is yours even when you hate hearing it. Next photo. The hall was empty. The box was gone. The apartment door was shut. Time between frames, 1 minute 12 seconds. No one arriving, no one leaving. I went through the rest more slowly after that. Different halls, different doors, some residential, some not. In every sequence, an object appeared outside a threshold, sat there for a short stretch, then was gone in the next frame. Box, bag, small suitcase, envelope, no delivery visible, no pickup visible, just there, then not there. The times were always odd, never round, 2:17, 3:08, 5:51, 11:14. The last 3 photographs were from the corridor outside, sublevel B intake. My corridor. The paint blister near the archive handle was visible. So was the dent in the cinder block where a cart had hit years ago. In the first frame, the hall was empty. In the second, the transit crate sat against the wall outside the door. In the third, the archive door stood open and the crate was gone. No timestamp on those, just static where the digits should have been. I looked over at the actual door then, stupidly, as if the photograph and the room might line up in some helpful way. There was only the narrow strip of hall light under it. I locked the archive door, then unlocked it because being locked in felt worse than being alone. Then I called security again and got voicemail. I thought about calling Denise, but even in my own head I sounded insane. So I did the thing people in clerical jobs always do when reality starts slipping sideways. I looked for documentation. Every item had an index number. I entered them one by one. Most returned nothing. A few pulled restricted notices. The maintenance work order brought up a closed service ticket from my apartment building, except the date on the ticket predated the software named at the bottom by several years. The child's glove returned a short incident note, marked property not retained. The cassette tape had no record at all. I don't know why I chose the tape next. Maybe because sound feels harder to fake than paper, or maybe I just didn't want to touch the photographs again. We had an old tape deck and media storage for digitizing council recordings. I brought it out, wiped dust off the buttons with my sleeve, and fed the cassette in. Hiss, a hard, mechanical click, then room tone. That's what got me first. The familiar parts, vent hum, pipe knock somewhere at a distance, ballast buzz. It sounded enough like the annex that I turned and looked behind me before I could stop myself. Then footsteps. Slow, not sneaking, just measured. They stopped close to the microphone. A man said, "Item is present at threshold. Time is 11:14. No witness at delivery. No witness at transfer." His voice was low and a little winded, like he'd been carrying something. A pause, then quieter. "Occupant, not yet aware?" Another voice answered from farther back. The sound was hollow, like a stairwell or tiled service room. "That one always becomes aware." The first man said, "Then why continue?" For a few seconds, there was only the room noise, then a light tone tapping sound, metal against something hard. The second voice said, "Because once the record exists, the address remains." After that, scrape, footsteps, a door opening, then blank hiss until the tape ended. I shut the player off and sat down. What scared me wasn't any one thing. It was the way each piece seemed to know the others. The photos, the tape, the keyring, the work order for an apartment I lived in. Each one on its own could have been prank, glitch, fraud, mistake, all together. They felt like paperwork from a process that had been going on around me for years, while I called it coincidence. Because there had been things outside my apartment before. I remembered them all at once, sitting there in that bad light, with the tape still spinning down in the deck. A cardboard carton marked books a few months after I moved in. No label, no address. I'd assumed it was left at the wrong door and shoved it down near the laundry room. A canvas grocery bag with an umbrella, and an old folded bus schedule in it. A pharmacy bag with nothing but crumpled packing paper. A single child sneaker, wet from rain, always at odd hours when I was coming back from late shift, always gone by the next morning. You live in a building long enough, you stop granting importance to small, unexplained things. That's one of the ways city life trains you. If you treated every abandoned object like a message, you'd never sleep. I started writing down every instance I could remember. Dates, approximate times, whether I'd used the stairs or elevator, whether there'd been building work that week, whether transit had been delayed. That's when the pattern showed itself. The appearances clustered around interruptions. Storms, boiler problems, water shutoffs, train delays, nights where entrances changed or routines got bent out of shape. Not every time, but enough that the column of notes on my pad stopped looking random. I went back to the maintenance work order from the crate. The apartment number had been blacked out with marker, but old carbon impressions still showed underneath if I tipped the page under the light. Unit 4B, my apartment. Date of request, years before I ever signed the lease. Reason, noise in walls, repeated occupant reports, source not found. I stared at that for a long time. Then I called the emergency line from my building management. I got a contractor who sounded half asleep and already irritated. I gave him the address and asked if 4B had old maintenance complaints attached to it. He asked who I was. I said I lived there. He said, "At 1 in the morning?" I said yes. More keyboard than conversation after that. Then he said there had been old plumbing chase complaints in that vertical stack. Noise reports, false leak calls, legacy records were messy. I asked if there had ever been a camera on the 4th floor hall. He said no. I asked if there had ever been issues with packages or maintenance materials being left outside 4B. He went quiet, and then he said, "There's an old super note saying not to leave supplies outside that unit." Why? No reason listed. You're looking at it now? No, he said, and I just remember it. It stood out. He sounded like he regretted saying even that. I asked him to send me a copy. He said he couldn't access the image archive remotely and got off the phone. I realized I was rubbing the brass tag from the old key ring hard enough to raise a dent in my thumb. There was still one thing from the crate I hadn't examined. The disposable camera. I turned it over in my hand, fully wound, no label. The plastic shell had yellowed slightly around the edges, but not enough for the date on the tags to make sense. I put it down again. The annex felt different by then. Same room, same flicker from the overhead strip, same rows of shelves and boxed ledgers and old fluorescent heat. But once you stop trusting a place, everything in it seems to move half an inch away from where it should be. I became aware of every tiny sound, the dehumidifier cycling, a drip somewhere in a drain line, the back wall giving off cold, my own breathing sounding louder than it should. I went back to the photo envelope and found one more sheet tucked behind the stills. Thin fax paper, almost gone white with age, only a few lines still readable. Do not place containers directly at residence after recognition event. Use intermediary site. Witness has begun to retain. Below that, in darker handwriting, then why did the archive receive one? There was no answer. Right then, I heard what I thought was the freight elevator. Not the full arrival, just enough movement that my head came up. The indicator panel outside the office was dark when I checked it, but I'd heard something, or I thought I had. I opened the archive door. The corridor was empty at first glance. Then I saw the box. It was sitting near the elevator gate at the far end of the hall. Plain brown cardboard, clean, fresh tape. Not dusty, not water-stained, not old. It hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. The corridor was too short, too bare. Nobody could have set it there without coming past the archive door. I stayed where I was. The motion lights in the hall dimmed a notch, then brightened when I shifted my weight. The box didn't change. Nothing moved around it. Finally, I walked over. Concrete floors always sound louder after midnight. My steps bounced off the block walls and came back at me. The box had one line written across the front in black marker. Property Archive, Sublevel B. Under that, smaller, for reconciliation. My hands were already shaking when I cut the tape. Inside was packing paper. Under that, a manila envelope, one key, one maintenance notice, and a black spiral notebook. The notebook was mine. Not like mine. Not similar to one I'd had. Mine, Cheap black plastic cover, bent corner, ring stain inside from where I'd set a coffee mug on it for months. It was the notebook I'd used my first year in the archive when the intake terminal kept freezing, and I wrote humidity readings and case numbers by hand. I had thrown it out. I knew that because Denise had once snapped at me for tossing handwritten material in regular trash instead of confidential shred. I'd ripped out the pages with sensitive notes and binned the rest. This notebook had the written pages in it, my handwriting, my abbreviations, my little boxed totals in the margins. The last written page wasn't one I remembered. At the top, in my handwriting, it said, "If this is the one you opened, stop bringing them inside." I read that once, and then again because I thought I'd read it wrong. Below it, the writing changed without quite changing. Same letters, same general shape, but pressed harder, uneven, as if the person writing had a shaking hand or too much urgency. "You already made the mistake at home. Don't repeat it here." I backed into the wall hard enough to feel the cinder block through my shirt. I don't have a clean memory of the next few seconds. I know I looked down the hallway. I know I looked at the box again, like maybe there would be a hidden speaker or camera or some ordinary mechanism waiting to rescue the situation. There was just the box, split open at the top, smelling faintly of cardboard and cold corridor air. Then the freight elevator actually started moving. This time I knew. The chain rattled, the motor engaged. The indicator panel lit floor by floor on its way down. I grabbed the notebook, key, and notice, and went back into the archive. I left the box in the corridor. I locked the door behind me. That detail matters to me now. The box stayed outside. Only the contents came in. The elevator arrived with that deep, clanging stop it always had. The gate opened. Footsteps. One person. Unhurried, not searching, not cautious either. Just somebody walking a route he knew. The steps stopped outside the archive door. There was a little patch in the wired glass window beside the frame, where years ago someone had scraped off the paint with a blade. I should not have looked, I know that. But people always look. A man stood in the corridor in city maintenance coveralls. Gray jacket, patch on the chest, clipboard in one hand, average height, average build, the kind of face you'd forget by lunchtime. I didn't recognize him, which meant nothing. We had contractors through there all the time. Still, something was wrong with him. Not obvious, nothing theatrical, just the stillness. He held himself the way mannequins hold themselves, like movement happened only when required and nowhere else. Even his breathing didn't seem to travel through the rest of him. He knocked once, soft, then he said through the door, "I'm here about 4B. My knees nearly went loose under me. He waited, then knocked again. Maintenance access, noise and walls. Same wording as the old work order. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, he said in the same calm voice, "You're retaining more than usual." He sounded closer that time. I had not heard him move. The archive phone rang so suddenly, I almost dropped the notebook. The man outside stopped talking. The phone kept ringing. I snatched it up because some part of me still believed a ringing desk phone meant there were rules left in the world. It was Denise. No hello. Just, why is there an irregular access alert on B level? I looked at the terminal. Somewhere in all of that, I must have tripped an audit flag. "There's an unmanifested delivery," I said. My voice sounded thin. "Old transit crate. Items don't match the record." Denise was silent for a second. Then she said very flat, "Did you open it?" I didn't answer fast enough. That was enough for her. "Listen carefully," she said. I could hear drawers opening on her end, papers sliding, a keyboard being hit too hard. Put everything back and leave the room. What is it? Do not inventory anything else. What is it, Denise? She took a breath like she had decided something against her own judgment. Years ago, there were sealed transfers connected to unresolved residency events. That's what they called them. Residency events. Items appearing at addresses without delivery trail. Matching prior occupants, current occupants, sometimes later occupants. Records tried to map it. Then materials started showing up in archive before the associated events occurred. I felt the skin tighten across the back of my neck. Why was it shut down? Because staff who worked the files started noticing corresponding drops at home. I looked at the notebook in my hand. Denise asked, "Is anyone there with you?" "There's a maintenance guy outside the door." Silence. Then, "No one from maintenance is assigned there tonight." Something touched the other side of the archive door. Not a knock this time, more like fingers resting against metal. I stopped breathing. Denise's voice sharpened. "Do not open it. Go to the back aisle and stay on the line." I moved, past the sort table, past the boxed ledgers, between shelving rows where the air was colder, and smelled faintly of old cardboard and machine oil. The touch came again, a small shift against the door. Then the latch clicked as if tested. Denise said, "Did anything arrive after the crate?" I looked down at the maintenance notice from the second box. It was an entry slip for Unit 4B, dated 2 days from then. Scheduled access window, 11:14 p.m. Reason for entry, sound migration, occupant complaint. No signature, no approval. Just the blank line where one should have been, I told her. For the first time since I'd worked under her, Denise lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "You need to leave before it reconciles." What does that mean? But she was already talking over me. "Put down anything from the second delivery if you can. Go out through stairwell C. Do not use the freight elevator. If you see anything outside your apartment tomorrow, do not bring it in." The handle on the archive door turned, slowly. I didn't wait for anything after that. Stairwell C was past media storage, and the map cabinets at the back where the annex gave way to rougher concrete, and the temperature dropped. I kept the phone to my ear, though Denise had become mostly noise, sharp instructions breaking in and out of the blood pounding in my head. Behind me, something moved in the archive, a rolling sound. Not fast, a scrape like weight shifting across steel. I did not look back. That's maybe the only decision from that night I still feel good about. I looked at the photos, I listened to the tape, I looked through the glass at the man outside, but once I heard movement inside those aisles, behind me, somewhere near the sort table where the crate had been open, I did not turn around. I hit the crash bar on the stair door so hard it bounced once before giving. The alarm should have screamed. It didn't. I took the steps 2 at a time, nearly went down once on the landing, caught myself, kept going. On the second floor, I realized I was still clutching the old key ring from the crate. I dropped it on the landing without stopping. I heard it spin once against the concrete and settle. When I got out through the ground level service exit, the air outside was wet and cold and smelled like rain on diesel. Weak street light, water beating on the loading dock rail. For one full second, I felt safe just because there was sky overhead. Then I looked across the street. There was a plain cardboard box beside the bus shelter, getting dark with rain. No label, no person near it, just there. I left. I drove for almost 2 hours, no destination, just away. Parked behind a grocery store, sat with the engine off and the wipers ticking down. Read the maintenance notice until the words stopped meaning anything. At some point, Denise texted that she'd closed the level. and I was not to come in until she called. That was all. I checked into a motel near the river around dawn and slept a few broken hours on top of the bedspread with the lights on. By afternoon, I had done what people always do after surviving something they can't file properly. I'd started reducing it. Stress, sleep deprivation, some kind of prank tied to old records. A pattern my brain had completed because it hates gaps. I even thought daylight might fix it. When I finally went back to my building, there was nothing outside 4B. The hallway looked normal. Someone had slid a pizza coupon under the fire notice. A scooter was tipped over near 4C. My lock turned clean. My apartment smelled stale and closed up, exactly like an apartment you haven't been in since yesterday. I actually laughed once under my breath, then I walked into the kitchen. The black notebook was sitting in the middle of the counter. Not damp from motel trash, not crumpled, not hidden, just placed there, square to the edge like someone had set it down carefully and wanted it noticed. It was open to the last page, under the earlier writing. And that same version of my hand that looked almost right until you stayed with it too long. There was one new line. You keep taking the contents and leaving the container. That has never been the rule.